Next chapter is about Jaloukavacharana. Jaloukavacharana व्याख्यास्यामः यथोवाच भगवान् धन्वन्तरिः. Jalouka, the leeches, they are considered to be one of the very frequently used tools in Ayurveda as such. That's what the Purana says. But as per the Sushruta text, there is a very limited indication. The Dhanvantari, Lord Dhanvantari, as mentioned in Puranas, is supposed to carry a Jaloka, Om Shankham Chakram Jalokam Tadada Amritam Amritagatam. So in the hands of Dhanvantari, a Jaloka is one of the essential features present. So Jaloka is given maximum importance. The leeches are given maximum importance from the historical point of view and from the theory point of view. That's about the general idea about Jaloka. Now, what Sushruta says is Jaloka is mainly used for bloodletting as a remedy for those who cannot be treated with other direct intervening methods like the Prachana, Shastra Vistravani, those cannot be done in such conditions, as well as there are certain specific indications. It's not that Jaloka is used in every patient. नृप आढ्य बाल स्थविर भीरु दुर्बल नारी सुकुमाराणाम् अनुग्रहार्थं परम सुकुमारोऽयं शोणितावसेचनोपायो अभीतस् जलोकसः. Jaloka are considered to be one of the most delicate method of bloodletting, which can be used in those persons who cannot tolerate the strain or stress of other remedies, other methods of Jaloka, the Raktamoksha. तत्र वातपित्तकफदुष्टशोणितं यथासंख्यं शृङ्ग जलौक अलाबुभिः अवसेचेत सर्वाणि सर्वे वा विशेषस्तु विस्राव्यं शृङ्ग जलौक अलाबुभिः गृह्णीयात्. The other methods of Raktamokshana are Shringa, Alabu, and then of course the Rakta Avasechana, either it could be vena puncture or vena section, Prachana, the other methods as such. Now, the indications for these could be either dosha specific or it could be in general. In all patients, it could be used as such. Now, in general, about the Jalokas are considered to be of Shita Guna, Shita Virya, and hence they are very specifically used in case of Kafaja Vyadhi, where there is involvement of Kafa with the Rakta. Jaloka is mentioned as a more specific indicated condition. Ushnam Samadhuram Snigdam Gavam Shungam Prakirtinam Tasma Dvatopasistetu Hitam Tadvasejane. Either in Vataja Vyadhi or Kapada Vyadhi. शीतादिवासाः मधुराः जलोकाः वासम्भवाः तस्मात् पित्तोपसृष्टेतु हितातु अवसेचने अलाभु कटुकं वृक्षं तीक्ष्णं च परिकीर्तितं तस्मात् श्लेष्मोपसृष्टेतु हितं तदवसेचने. Okay, now I think there was an error in my expression. The jalokas are specifically mentioned for the pitta javadi and kapha javadi because of the shita guna. They are specifically used for the pitta javadi. So correction, in the previous sentence I just expressed wrongly that it's a Kabja Vyadhi. It's in the Pitta Vyadhi that they are indicated. Whereas the Shringa, the horns of animals which are used for suction, are used for Vataja Vyadhi, and the Alabu where you will have a light as such, and the partial vacuum is created in the Alabu. That's then used in case of Kafaja Vyadhi because of the heat in present in the technique as such. तत्र प्रक्षिते तनुभस्ति पटल अवरुद्धेन शृंगेन शोणितम् अवसेचयत् आतुष्णात् सान्तर्दीपया अलाभ्वा जलायुधाः उक्ष्यन्ते. The basic techniques of using the other tools, Shringa and Shringa and the Alabu are, Shringa is used after making a small incision over the surface and then it's kept over the area and sucked out. We'll have more detailed discussion about the technique of Shringa in later on in the later chapters, like how to use and so on. Similarly, Alabu also is done after making a superficial incision and then keeping a light or a lamp with the burning lamp, and is covered with the Alabu so that a partial vacuum is created. In both the techniques, there is a vacuum created. In case of Shringa, the vacuum is created with the suction from the mouth, whereas Alabu, the vacuum is created by the consumption of the oxygen by the light as such. More details about these techniques we will discuss later on in the coming chapters. The present is about the Jaloka. Now, Jaloka are Jalam Asam Ayuriti Jalayukaha, Jalam Asam Mokiti Jalokasah, Tah Dwadasha, तासां सविशाः षट् तावत्येव निर्विशाः. The leeches or Jaloka are named as Jaloka because they are living in water. The natural habitat is in water, and hence they are called as Jaloka. And there are 12 species of Jaloka mentioned in Sushruta. But from the present biology point of view, the Jaloka are belonging to the Clitoriatal class and Emelida phylum, and subclass is Hirudina. They are the subclass of Hirudina, and there are almost around 700 species of leeches identified worldwide, and they have a basic constant structure of a sucker at one end and another posterior sucker. There are two suckers and a gastrointestinal tract so that they can suck the blood. So this sucking apparatus, sucking structure is very classical in case of the leeches. The anterior sucker is used for holding, supporting, whereas the posterior sucker is for the suction of the blood as such. Now, the fellow species of Jaloka mentioned by Sushruta are Dasavishaha, Krishnaha, Karpuraha, Alagardaha, Indrayuha, Samudrika, 𝐽𝐿. Out of the 12, 6 are considered as poisonous, and the other 6 are considered as non-poisonous, which could be used for the treatment as such. Now, the description of those 6 species is based upon their physical characters, appearance as such. Now, whether these color and then characters are really can be seen or not, that's the question. So I have tried to search for the different species of the leeches and whether we can see those features or not. Now, based upon that, I have collected a few of those images of the current available species of these leeches, which have the similar description of the what Sushruta has mentioned. So those features are visible, but whether exactly those species are recognized by Sushruta as poisonous or not, that's a question mark. About those details, I don't have sufficient information. The only issue is about their color and the appearance as it is seen now. Anjanachurnavarnaha Putushiraha Krishnaha. These are seen in Hirudina Ecanthabdera. Those who are interested in biology, you can go into more study about these species. Varmi Matsyavata Ayataha Chinna Unnata Pukshik Karpuraha. Where the shape is like a fish and the abdomen has a depression. This is exactly the same features are seen in Animalia blancodegata. And the Romashaha, Mahaparshvaha, Krishnamukhi, Alagarda, a Alagarda variety of Jaloka, has a blackish colored mouth and it has hairy surfaces. Body has a hairy surface. This is seen in Nerissa pelagica, another species as such. Indrayudhavate Urdhva Rajibhihi Chitraha Indrayudha. Indrayudha are those leeches which have multiple hairs, tuft of hairs or hairy structures over the tip, and this kind of exactly the same features are seen Pisicola geometra. Whereas Ishadasita Vichitra Pushpakriti Chitraha Samudrika are having a light, slightly a whitish or yellowish color, and they have multiple spots over the surface of the body, and this kind of feature is in Herabdella europaea acid. Gobrashnavata Adhobhage Vidabhutakriti Anumki 𝐾𝐽, where you will have two these bulgings over the surface which looks like the scrotum of the ox. Now, this kind of a feature is in Herabdella triceratops. That's the species as such. Now, these are the features which are mentioned in Sushruta. And my purpose of showing these images is not to say that these are exactly the same species mentioned by Sushruta. Instead, the point is by looking at the external features of these insects or the leeches, they were classified, and that shows this appreciation that shows needs appreciation of the observation of Sushruta of these different species of animals, and maybe whether the same species which I have mentioned they are having the similar effects as mentioned in Sushruta about their poisonous effects or not, that part I don't know. There is no such information available, but that's something which needs work study later on. Now, the complications which can occur due to the so-called Savisha Jalos are Tabir Daste, Purushe, Damshe Shwaituhu, Atimatram, Kanduhu, Murcha, Jwaro, Daha, Chaddihi, Madaha, Sadarmiti Lingani Bhavanti. When there is if there is a complication produced due to this Savisha Jaroka, the complications could be like at the area where there is a bite, there could be more swelling, there could be itching. That swelling and itching is a very common feature due to the leech bite. Now, in the present day situation, we get a good number of patients who get accidental leech bites, particularly in the hill region. And these leech bites, the major now again, whether these symptoms produced due to the leeches are really species specific or due to other factors, that's a question mark. But the common clinical signs of a patient with a leech bite is the signs of allergy, hypersensitivity reactions, a swelling at the area, itching over the area. That's the most common. Or the other is a continuous bleeding. A particular continuous bleeding are the other two common signs. Now, Atimatram, Kanduhu, and Shwayathu, these are the signs of allergy. In addition to that, there could be a possibility of septicemia. The organism's septic complications can occur. At the end of this survey, I'll try to mention about the data available about the leach bite complications in the current these studies. Then again, the septic complications or transmission of the other diseases also is possible with the leech bite. तत्र महागदः पानालेपनस्य कर्मादिषु उपयुज्यः इन्द्रायुधात् अष्टमम् असाध्यम्. Now, the Mahagada is the treatment. Mahagada is mentioned in the Agada chapter in Uttaratantra. We will have that description later on. Now, that's the suggested treatment in case of the Jalauka bite. The Indrayudha produced injury is considered as asadhya. Ityeshaha savishaha sakitsitaha vyakhyataha. Atha nirvishaha. Nirvishaha kapila, pingala, shankmukhi, mushika, pundarikamuki, savarika cheti. Now their appearance also, you can see the same features like the description which are mentioned in the text and whether they are seen clearly. Manashila iva Parshvabhyam Priste Snigdha Muktavarna Kapila. Kapila is the where you will have a Manashila like somewhat greenish tint and over the sides, and you'll see a line like this is typically the Hirudina medicinalis, the most frequently used species. And whenever you select the leeches, it's better to have this kind of the appearance, the physical features. Hirudina medicinalis is universally used for the treatment throughout the world, and hence probably the Kapila variety of the Jaloka is what Sushruta has preferred, and most of the leeches which are available in our district in Udupi, particularly in Hiriyat area, they are of similar species as such. So you are safe to use those leeches. But if you go to some other area and the leeches there, whether they really are of this Nirvisha category or not, that's questionable. But we get a good number of these species here. Now the other variety are Kinchit Rakta Vrittakaya Pinga Ashugata Pingala, the somewhat reddish colored and almost circular body that's seen in Mayumdila Biticoferi. That's the other species. And Yakratvarna Shigarvayani Dirgadikshamukhi Shankmukhi. Shankmukhi is having a Yakratvarna, somewhat grayish color, and it's having it tends to suck the blood more rapidly. That's a Hirdina enriched here. The again in our area in Udupi and surrounding areas, this kind of leeches also are available. Hirudina erinicha also are available quite frequently. So particularly if you collect the leeches somewhere in the winter season, later part of the rainy season, you'll get this kind of leeches. Whereas in the early season, rainy season, you get the Hirudina medicinalis quite frequently. Now, exactly furthermore about the habitats and then biology, I don't have much information, but this is some a general notion which we know and certain information. Then Mushika Kritivarna Anistagandhati Mushika. Mushika is having a shape of rats, and this is seen in Plasmodium parasitica. And then Pundarikakriti Tulyavakta Pundarika a Pundarikavata, the tip sucking end is quite bulgy and looks like a flower that's seen in Macrodella decora. And Snigdha Padmavatavarna Ashtarashangala Pramana Savarika. Savarika is where the size is quite big and it has greenish color. Now this is seen in Hirina granulosa. It's also Savarika according to Shruti is used in the animal husbandry for treating the diseases of animals that's used. तासां यवन पौण्य यवन पाण्ड्य सस्य पौत्रादीनि क्षेत्राणि तेषु महाशरीराः बलवत्य शीघ्रपायिनः महाशनाः नीरुषाः विशेषाश्च भवन्ति. The optimum, the geographic areas where these are easily available and the optimum areas according to Sugar, Yavana, Pandya, Saushya, Pautana Kshetra. Yavana Kshetra is somewhere in Pakistan, also on that western part of the area. Pandya is the southern part, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and then Karnataka. These are the areas. Sakshya is the Madhya Pradesh area, that area. Pautana is eastern area, Bengal. Some these are the zones which were mentioned in the earlier historical geographical distribution. Now, of course, as we get the resources, leeches almost are available throughout the world, and in India, almost in every area, you get the leeches. But there is a difference in the species, the frequency of the species. As I said, the medicinalist species are more available in our zone, Urbi district. Whereas if you go higher up, like Shivamogga or Hasana, that the species you get is something different. So there is a need for further more study. I don't have more authentic information about these issues, but there is a need for more authentic study and identification of the exact species of so-called Savisha and the Nirvisha variety of the leeches before we use. Now, तथा सविषा मत्स्य कीट दर्दोर मूत्र पुरुषकोथ जाताः कलुषेषु अम्बसु च शविषाः. Now, even if those are considered as the Nirvisha variety, if the locality or the habitat of these leeches has more of mud or it's dirty, then it can act as the Savisha as such. पद्मोत्तल नलिन कुमुद सौगंधिक कुवलय पुंडरीक शैवाल कोथजाताः विमलेषु अम्भस्सु जनिरुषाः. Those which are available in clean water and having the Padma Utpala, etc., the plants which are optimum, in such a species would be always have a nirvisha property. So it's not only the characters, the physical characters of the leeches which is important, it's also important about the habitat, the locality from where the leeches are collected also is important. क्षेत्रेषु विचरन्त्येताः सलिलाढ्यसुगन्धिषु न च सङ्कीर्णचारिण्यो न पङ्केशयाः सुखाः. Those which have a free movement in a clean water, they are preferred, whereas those which have a complex movement or which do not have much of movement, or those who are in the dormant stages, or those who are in the mud, they are not to be collected. So when you go for the leech collection, it's better to collect the leeches which are floating in water and who have an active movement. But practically what happens is when you go for a leech collection, to get the leeches, catch leeches which are flowing in water is quite difficult. But whereas it's easy to catch the leeches which are located in the mud. So that's a practical issue. But Sushil says that kind of leeches are not preferred. तासां ग्रहणम् आर्द्रचर्मणा अन्यर्वा प्रयोगैः प्रणीयात्. To catch the leeches, Sushil suggests about use of this leather of animals which is moist, so that the leeches catch by the smell. Of course, it's not necessary. It can be leeches can be picked up with the hand if you go to the areas where the leeches are quite frequent. Then after catching the leeches are to be cultivated in the domestic condition, and that artificial cultivation, the Sushruta had used a earthen pot. Nave athayenam nave mahati ghate saras tadakodaka pankam avapya niradhyata. So in a pot you have to pour clean water as well as some dirt, this mud also has to be placed. Bhakshartam cha asam upahayat shaivaram. The algae, green algae, they are used for the food of them, so you add them also. Valu Modukamsha Kandan Churni Pradya. Vallura are the plant, the pieces of the roots of the Vallura and Modaka, they also could be used as a Shayastamtra Modakani Japatani. For their rest, you have to leave, allow some leaves in the aquarium, that area where the, or the part where the leeches have to be cultivated. Practically, there is no need of adding these substances, leaves, etc., because adding the leaves will make the water decay. So even without that, adding the water, leeches can survive. Treha cha abhyo anyat jalam bhakshancha tadyata. Once in 3 days, the water has to be changed. Saptaratra cha ghatamanyam sankramayat. Once in 7 days, that pot has to be changed. But practically, what happens is most of the times we do not change the pot regularly. Water, of course, is changed regularly. भवति चात्र स्थूलमध्याः परिक्लिष्टाः पृथ्व्यो मन्दविचेष्टिताः अग्राह्युण्यो अल्पपायिन्यः सविशाश्च न पूजिताः. When you select the leech for the Raktamokshana, the leeches which have a relatively thick mid part of the body, or those who seem to be inactive or less active, those who do not really suck or they suck lesser, they are not used, and Sabisha, of course, are not to be used. So those which are very active and thin bodied, they need to be selected. Now the procedure of the leech application is अथ जलोक अवसेक साध्य व्याधितम उपवेश्य संवेश्य वा विरुक्ष चास्य तमावकाशं मृद् गोमय चर्मेहि यदि अरुज स्यात् गृहीताश्रिताः सर्षप रजनी कल्क उदक प्रदीप्तगात्रीः सलिल सरक मध्ये मुहूर्तस्थिताः विगतक्रमाः ज्ञात्वा ताभिः रोगं ग्राह्येत. In the Rashtriya Ayurveda, when leeches are suggested, Jaloka are suggested, Sushruta has suggested that indication of localized lesions for the indication of Jaloka. Whereas if the lesion is a systemic lesion, Rakta Mokshana otherwise, that Siravyadha and the Prachana are usually preferred. So whenever there is a localized lesion and if it is a Pittaja Vyadi, where there is a more of signs of inflammation, then Jalokas are preferred, leeches are preferred. And before you apply over the area, that area has to be rubbed with the Gomaya Churna so that the vascularity is increased. And again, Sushruta says that rubbing is necessary only if the condition is painless. If already the patient has pain, there is no need of rubbing because that's a sign of inflammation. Pain is a sign of inflammation, and in an inflammatory swelling, rubbing is not necessary. Then the leeches have to be processed with the Rajani Kalkaudaka, the water with the Karkima or maybe Sarshapa. I have seen that using Sarshapa produces more irritation to the leeches, whereas the Rajani, the Karkima, is much better than the Sarshapa. Sarila Sarkamadhyam Muhurtasthitaha Vigataklamaha Jnaka Tabi Rogam Graheta. So they have to be washed with that Karkima water, and then they have to be applied over the area. Shlakshana Shukla Artha Pitu Protavachinam Kutwa Mukham Avarunyata. Once they start sucking, that area has to be, the leeches have to be covered with a moist, thin cloth. That's they usually preferred because otherwise the area becomes dry and they may not suck continuously. अग्रणं च क्षीरबिन्दुं शोणितबिन्दुं वा दद्यात् शस्त्रप्रदानं वा कुर्वेत तद् यदि एवमपि न गृह्णात् तदा अन्यं ग्राह्येत. So most of the times when you use the leeches, this happens, like the leeches may not suck as such, they may not start sucking at all. And in such a situation, Sushruta has suggested put a drop of milk or put a drop of blood over the area or make a very superficial incision. Of course, what I have seen is instead of putting a drop of blood from elsewhere, just put a needle, puncture the area with a needle, and once that blood starts flowing out, leeches easily suck. But still, there are some disobedient leeches which may not suck continuously. Even then they have to be rejected, and then you use a different leech as such. यदा च निमिषते अश्वकुरबद्वाननं कृत्वा उन्नम्यते स्कन्दं तदा जानीयात् गृह्णाति इति. The signs that it is sucking is that it has a hook-like, the shape of the body becomes hook-like, that sucking end will be raised as such. The other end, it holds to the surface firmly, so the other end is to hold the area firmly, and hence the whole body looks like a horseshoe. This Ashokravata appearance we seen. So once it starts sucking, Ardhavastravachanam Krutva Dharayat. You have to cover the area with a wet moist cloth and leave it aside. दंशे तोदकंडु प्रादुर्भावैः जानीयात् शुद्धम् इयम् आदत्त इति शुद्धम् आददानम् अपनयेत अथ शोणितगन्धेन च मुञ्चेत् मुखम् अस्याः सैन्दवचूर्णेन avakireta. When the leeches start sucking, usually there will be no pain because the secretions of the leech's mouth would have mild analgesic activity too, so there will be no pain or no irritation. But as they continue to suck, there could be slightly pain, not severe, moderate pain, and itching could be felt over the area. And Sushu says that's a sign that it has started pure blood. Now, whether that impure blood and pure blood is separated or not, this is again a question where we may not have a very definite answer. But theoretically, yes, theoretically, that impure blood is sucked by the leeches, not the pure blood. But as we study with the biochemical studies, that difference is not really made out. So that's a big question mark about that theory, like whether there is a real impure blood getting separated by the leeches or not. That question mark, but it sucks the blood, that's true. When Shuddham Adadanam Apaneta, once it starts that sucking that pure blood or that sign of leaching is seen, then it has to be removed. If the leeches do not get displaced or do not prefer to get displaced easily, put a crystal of Saindavachurna over the area, then it can be released easily. So if it is difficult for releasing, then you have to put a Saindavachurna. Even that's also one of the issue. Even Haridra also can be used for making those leeches release the area. अथ पतितां तण्डुलखण्डन प्रदीप्तगात्रीं तैललवण अभ्यक्तमुखीं वामहस्त अंगुष्ठात् अंगुलीभ्यां गृहीतपुच्छां दक्षिणहस्त अंगुष्ठाङ्गुलीभ्यां शनैः शनैः अनुलोमम् अनुवार्जयेत् आमुखात् वामे तावत् यावत् सम्यक् वान्तरिङ्गानीति. Now, you are not supposed to leave the leeches with that blood to be digested by themselves. So that blood has to be vomited out, excreted out. And this is done by a gradual squeezing. You hold with one hand and with the other hand, just go on squeezing so that the blood again is excreted out through the mouth or vomited out rather. Samyak vanta sarita saraktanyasta bhuktu kama sati charet. If you have made that blood come out properly, then the leeches will be active. As you keep in water, they show that movement. Yaha sidati nachestate sadurvanta. If it doesn't doesn't show the activity, then that's a sign that the your suction or removal of the blood is not proper, and then again it has to be the whole process has to be repeated. Dhruvantayaha vyadhi asadhyaha indramado nam bhavati atha suvantam purvat sanidadhyat. If the blood is not removed out completely, it results in a disease called as indramadha. Now, as far as from the biology point of view, we do not know like whether there is a real disease produced or not. The leeches have a natural habit of consuming the blood, and they have a property of digesting the blood. The only issue is they once they suck the blood for about 1 month, they do not require any other food. They can survive with that blood and the nourishment produced by that one suction. So almost for a long period, they remain dormant. They will be inactive. Whether that phase of inactivity is named as Indramata or is that something else, that's another question where we may not have a very definite answer. But what we can see is during that period, they will be inactive. They become active only after about a month or so. So long time is required for the digestion. So probably the idea of making the blood vomit out would be to keep them more alert throughout. Then Shonitase yoga naveksha shatadota abhyangah tatpitudaharanam va. Jaloukavacharana madhuna avagatet शीताभिः परिषेचेत भग्नीतवा कषाय मधुरस्निग्ध शीतेश्च प्रदेहेषु प्रदिह्यात इति. The wound which is produced by the suction of the blood by the leeches, it has to be treated with either shatadota or madhukrita. Of course, even Haridra Churna also can be applied over the area, and a tight bandage is required. Usually, you will have that oozing of the blood for a considerably long period, and then it stops by itself. क्षेत्राणि ग्रहणं जातिः पोषणं च अवचारणं जलोकसान्त यो वेत्ति तत्साध्यान् स जयेत् गतान्. those who have a well-versed knowledge of the availability of the leeches and the technique of catching and then maintenance of the leeches can treat those diseases which can be treated with the leeches. Now, a bit about the leeches from the current point of view. Leeches are used even in the current surgical practice, but not exactly with the same concept as what Sushruta has suggested. Mainly, the use of leeches are in plastic surgeries to improve the vascular sufficiency of the reimplantation whenever skin graft, particularly skin graft, or any other grafts are done, and at that junction of the graft, if there is a bleeding, that bleeding can be stopped or reduced, and hence the venous obstruction can be reduced, and revascularization of the tissue is facilitated. And in the current surgical practice, leeches are used with that purpose. Or leeches, one of the extract of the secretion of the leeches is a hirudin, which is used as an antithrombin, and antithrombin is used for medicines too, as a medical treatment to prevent thrombosis. And these are, though not very popular, but particularly in the plastic surgery, use of leeches is quite popular, whereas hirudin used as a antithrombotic drug is not a very popular, but still it's quite used, and it's considered as a new anticoagulant agent as such. As far as the biochemical activity of these leeches secretions, the leeches have anticoagulation and thrombin regulatory factors, and the substances which are now identified, separated from the secretions of the leeches are hirudin, so on, which are also anticoagulant factors. And some of the contents also have a anti-inflammatory and anti-analgesic activity too, and these substances are identified, chemically identified, and they are now separated. There is an extensive study done on these leeches, these secretions, and these are the results as such. And it also has a platelet inhibition property, and that platelet inhibition property is done by these identified chemicals. And it also reduces extracellular matrix gradation. The extracellular gap between the two cells would have a thick matrix, and that becomes degraded by the use secretions of the leeches. That's a hyaluronidase. And it also has a mild antimicrobial context. So the leech secretion, the saliva of the leeches particularly, would be having all these anticoagulant, anti-inflammatory, platelet inhibition, and the antimicrobial property to a certain extent as such. This is a known study. These are studied and known as such. At the same time, leeches also are having evidences of some disease being transmitted, particularly in the natural habitats. Uh, in as the leeches producing the disease during these medicinal uses also are known, and you can get a few of the references. I have just put in those articles which are published about that, and you may go through these articles where the incidences of such diseases are known. And in these African countries, Ebola virus, which was considered to be an epidemic a few years back, uh, it was having at the end, the leeches were considered to be the main source of such diseases, and leeches also are considered to be potential vectors for many other rickettsial infections. These are all the studied facts about the leeches. So whenever we use leeches, we should be aware of these facts too, whether a leech can be reused or not, when it can be reused, and there was some question like whether it can be used in HIV patients, so on. Now, in all these conditions, we need to accept that there is a possibility of potential possibility of transmission of the diseases, and these facts have to be kept in mind before we give a concluding statement about that. Now, with this, we'll conclude this chapter. Summary: the leeches were and are used in medicine throughout the world, and proper selection of leech and cultivation techniques are explained in Sutra. Uh, the indications for use of leeches in contemporary medicine are different from the Ayurvedic text. So, with that, we'll conclude.